Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to a Shenmue Dojo video. Today's video, I'm going to be sort of going back over something I covered probably about a year or so ago now, if you might remember that. I'm talking about a Shenmue Remake. Now, I talked about it about a year ago when there was an article from Sega, a new president, and they were talking about reviving old franchises, and I asked the question, could a remake happen? And talked a little bit about what it could and couldn't do. I'm going to go in this video into the nitty gritty detail of what I think a Shenmue remake could do, what it should change, and the pros and cons and some final thoughts of the whole idea. This may be a long one, we'll see how we go. But I am very, very interested to see what people think about this idea as well. Now, a couple of little things I'm going to sort of preface this in sort of going forward. I'm aiming that this would be in Unreal 5. I'm also making the assumption that Sega are doing this, obviously with support from Wisenet Yuzuki, sort of an overseer director, if you want to call it. And I'm not really going to talk about budget itself, although there will be a mention of it within the video as we go. So first off, I'm going to look at what it should keep and what it should potentially change. Now, at the top of the list I've got here straight away is the music. The Shenmue music is insane. You could save money by reusing the old music. You could obviously do some new ones if you wanted to, but there is a massive Shenmue tracks that work so well for the game, well for the tone of the game, that actually you don't really need to dive in too much to it. If you are going to do new music, keep it in the theme, keep it in the feeling of the original games, and I think you'll be on to a winner. Leading on from that is the atmosphere of the Shenmue games. Now, for me, especially the first two games, the atmosphere is insanely good. You feel like you are in Ryo's shoes the whole way through. The worlds feel alive. They're detailed. They're gorgeous looking. It's unparalleled in the detail that it gives. And there aren't many games out there that will go to the level of detail that Shenmue did and has been. It is ambitious. It is also very, very costly. But I would like them to find a balance between the atmosphere and the detail, and maybe finding some way to potentially bring the development cost down to make this thing more viable. On top of that, weather system. It's got to have the weather system. Now, it will obviously need updating for Unreal, but I would love to see literally a one-to-one mimic of the weather system from Shenmue 1, Shenmue 2 in a potential remake. That would be absolutely insane. So you literally use the day-to-day data from the games, the Shenmue mode, and also you can use the real weather data from 1986. You've got it there already, so you just need to make sure it comes across and then implement that into the games. That would be a really, really nice touch. And also, who doesn't like walking through the snow in Shenmue and the crunch of that snow as you walk through it? You can't lose that. Coming into sort of the other bits around it, mini games. If it was made by Sega, then obviously you'd have the Sega mini games. You'd have the arcade games from the 80s, Space Harrier, Hang On, Outrun, Afterburner, a 4, obviously then QTE title, looks like QTE. You wouldn't really need to change those too much. You could maybe look at adding in some other new ones, even some mechanical type mini games if you wanted to. But you wouldn't really need to change that too much. It's pretty good as it is. On top of that, QTE set pieces. So many games use these nowadays. It's a staple, I think, of a lot of AAA open world type games. Maybe modernize the system, make it that way, but generally QTEs I think are in. I have no problem with them. You could maybe update the system a little bit, use some of the command QTEs from Shenmue 2, obviously into Shenmue 1. But and maybe have a few more action sequences, perhaps, which is a point I'm going to come on to in a bit. But I would use QTEs within a remake. It makes absolute sense. The fighting engine, now obviously a controversial topic in Shenmue community between the Virtua Fighter engine and Shenmue 3 engine. Both have their pluses, both have their minuses. I'd love them to redesign a fighting system that blends together the best of both systems. I don't know how possible that is, but if they had to choose one, I'd probably just stick with the Virtua Fighter system. It's known, they've got it, they have all the assets and access to it. It makes sense. But I love them to combine the two, because what Shenmue 3 does so well, it does multi-man battles really, really well. And I actually think some of the combos string together a little bit better in some aspects, but not all. Also, I think the Shenmue 3 engine is easier for new people to understand and sort of button bash a little bit and get away with it. The Virtual Fighter system is a bit more punishing in that regard. Talking of other, like I say, bits and pieces, staples, Shenmue games, forklifts. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm saying this. Shenmue 1, obviously, as we all know, has the forklift section. I have no problem with it. I think it needs some system within it to either let people skip through it, let people maybe speed through it a bit quicker, or give people the option of doing the 5-day forklift if they so wish. Because there has been a criticism of Shenmue 1 that being tied into that 5-day forklift in can be a bit tedious and boring. I don't have a problem with it personally, but I think modern gamers would expect at least an option to say something along the lines of, you're just about to be locked into a 5-day job window, whatever. If you wish to skip and do the story bits, click, press X or whatever. If you wish to continue, there you are. And then hopefully they can amalgamate that together. But that would fit in to something that I'm going to come on to in a little bit. And then the final thing I want to talk about is the capsules. You absolutely have to keep the capsules and the things to spend money on within the shops. The shops I'll come on to in a bit in terms of how they could work and maybe save a little bit of money. I don't know, but we'll see. I'd also like to keep, if possible, the English voiceover actors. I'd also like to keep the Japanese ones where possible. I think they did a really good job, but I have a comment on the direction of that, which I'm going to come on to now, which is the bits that should change. And as I'm talking about the voiceover, I will start there. So the voiceover in Shenmue, yes, it's charming, certainly the English, but it is massively open to criticism. I keep the English voice actors, but I would certainly look for a more modern direction in the way the thing is delivered, so it feels more natural. The Japanese was always fine. I wouldn't change too much about it. You just need to make sure that translations are good as we go. So I'd change it, update it, but I wouldn't go to town on this sort of thing. Going back through the other bits here, controls. Shenmue was made in 1999, 2000. It didn't have analog controls at the time. I think they were probably sort of on the edge of that. I don't know why they didn't. It seems like games were going that way at the time. But now I think it have to have analog controls. They have to have modern controls. Shenmue 3 obviously had modern controls, but I think they struck that balance quite well, giving Ryo some weight, but also allowed people to have a bit more freedom in how he moved. Just use that as a basis, update it, and I think then you'd have pretty much a good idea of the system, what you want to use. The Like a Dragon games are probably as close as to what I think it could turn out to in terms of the movement. I find personally sometimes in those games the controls feel a tiny little bit floaty when moving around, so I'd like a tiny bit more weight, but that is just a personal opinion. Next, this is what comes into the mechanics of Shenmue itself and the whole weight function idea, which was in Shenmue 2, but not in Shenmue 1. Now, I'd have it in Shenmue 1 without doubt, because there's several times where you need to wait for quite a long time in game before you move on to the next story point, or you're waiting for something to happen. I'd have that in there without a doubt. But what I would do is potentially have a Shenmue mode, so for classic people like me who want to play it as it was, obviously updated, I can do that. But I'd also want a modern mode for people, so they can have quest markers, they can have maps, they can have basically a streamlined experience, so they can skip some of the fluff that is in Shenmue, which I know is probably here, a bit of almost like blasphemy for people here, but you've got to consider it from a balanced point of view. I love it, but some parts of Shenmue 1 especially do have, it does feel a bit fluff around it, and I get why, but you could potentially cut some of that fluff and maybe merge Shenmue 1 and 2 into one experience. Could you add the boat chapter as well to maybe take advantage of that more streamlined Shenmue 1? Maybe, but who knows. Now, also something that would be talked about around a change is potentially having more action. Now, I don't mean going down the random fights route like a Dragon does. I don't think that would fit the Shenmue aesthetic, and I personally wouldn't want that. What I would like is potentially, you've got in obviously Shenmue 3, you have the Rose Garden, you have tournaments in Shenmue 3, you go through the dojos, you also have all the street fights in Shenmue 2. Maybe you could expand that out into Shenmue 1 somehow. Could you use the anime opening, the karate tournament, as an example of that for then other tournaments to pop up later on? I don't know, but that would then give people more access to more action when they want it. If you streamline some of the story, the action points would be further, closer together, so it feels like you aren't getting lost in too much of the sort of the in-betweeny bits that I think Shenmue gets criticised for sometimes. But if you have a Shenmue mode and you have a modern mode, then you can balance that out so people can choose whether they want a more atmospheric or encompassing experience, or they want a more story-driven experience, essentially. Next sort of point on that is money barriers. Now, I've talked about the forklifting section already. I don't have a massive issue with the money barriers in Shenmue 2 or Shenmue 3 because it's fairly easy to earn money, but they come on you from nowhere. And I wonder if certainly in Shenmue 2 you can make it easier to earn money without the use of save scum. I think people do it anyway, but it's there. Or you just remove them completely and you lean into the anime potentially. For example, when you meet Ren, obviously Ryo doesn't need money, from what I remember anyway, and he meets Ren. So could you sort of tie that in a slightly different way, not going too far away from the original source material, but leaving it open to interpretation a little bit, so if you want to speed things along, you could do, and it will remove that frustration of a money barrier, potentially. Next bit is the inventory. The Shenmue inventory menus are fine. I don't have a problem with them. Maybe they just need to be streamlined and modernised a little bit. One controversial topic I'm going to say here is around the shops. Now, maybe you don't need to have every item to be able to be picked up in a shop. I know Shenmue didn't, but there are a lot of items that could be picked up, and it was great, and it felt really cool at the time. But from a budget standpoint, do you need that? Could you cut that away? Could you streamline that, for example? The other question is, do you need to enter every shop? Are there some, for example, you don't need to, so therefore we just close them off? Obviously, Shenmue 1 and 2, you could enter, I think, probably about 95% of the places that you went to, which was brilliant, and I'm all for it if they can make that work. But if they can't, then it's a potential to save a little bit of money there somewhere. I would also have instant loading for the shops like you do in Like a Dragon, where you just walk in, the doors open, and bam, you're straight in there without any issues at all. So that's what I'd keep, what I'd change. Now let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of this idea. Starting with the pros, obviously. Now, straight up, Shenmue is an absolute classic game. It's beloved. It's got, well, I say beloved with the fan base. I think wider gaming's very divided on it potentially, but it pioneered a lot of what modern open world games have done today. So a remake could sort of reintroduce that innovation to a new audience. It revitalizes the classic game. A new audience pick this up for the first time. They pick up with updated graphics, updated gameplay mechanics, and I would really, really like, that could really, really work. And with that sort of graphical side of it, I'd love like full-on ray tracing, the works. Make it look as pretty as possible. Make it stand out as much as possible, which we'll come on to a little bit in a minute. Now, with leveraging sort of modern technology, they obviously allow for better graphics. They allow for smoother gameplay, more immersive experiences. Now, it would address some limitations in the original Shenmue games, so you could explore other ways of bringing the world to life, streamline some of that in development so it's easier to do, and therefore bring down the development costs. On top of that, potentially you could expand the fan base. Now, the Shenmue fan base is incredibly vocal. There is a good group of us that are very, very shouty about Shenmue, but we need more people to do it. Now, if you attract not just us, but new fans, that could then also make the opportunity for further installments down the line more viable. The bigger the fan base, the more money you can make, and away you go. And speaking of money, it is also an opportunity for new merchandise. So if you've got a new game coming out, a proper new Shenmue 1 and 2 remake, you could absolutely smash the merchandise as well and monetize that fan base as much as you can. On top of that, as I've already sort of come on to a little bit, if it sells well, you could set up further installments for the series, which would then hopefully get things finished, and you could use that engine from Unreal 5 to finish things off. And you know how vocal I've been about that they need to use the Shenmue 3 engine for Shenmue 4, chuck it in Unreal 5, and away you go. It'd be absolute insanity not to. If they had something like this remake, they could absolutely use that for Shenmue 4, Shenmue 0, and smash it out of the park. But there's always another side to this argument. And that is the, sort of the downsides, the cons, if you like. Now, to produce a game like Shenmue, it is going to cost a bucket load of money. So that is already straight away a con, considering the known fan base for Shenmue. It is very vocal, but it is very small. So you are taking a big risk. And as I've said many, many times, there needs to be a sort of a middle ground between what you'd like to do and what you can do in terms of the marketability. Now, some people may throw caution to the wind and go, to hell with it, let's do this, let's take a risk. But given the economic climate and all the layoffs in the industry, etc., and very much games becoming very samey, homogenized, that isn't as likely to happen as it was, say, 20, 25 years ago. You then have to balance sort of the modern expectations with nostalgia. And this then could alienate a lot of the fan base, because if you over-modernize it, go too far, people like us who have grown up with these games and have a certain, think they should feel a certain way, play a certain way, you risk alienating us a little bit. But is that the risk worth taking? It's difficult. You've got to balance that out. On top of that, you've got market, the market these days. Now, gaming is absolutely flooded with AAA open world titles that have some sort of fighting engine, some sort of story, you name it. How do you make Shenmue stand out from the rest? Do you go all in on the atmospherics of the world? Do you go all in on the story? Do you go and change the design of it a little bit? Now, Shenmue 1 and 2 are it's probably as realistic a graphics as you could get at the time. Obviously, Shenmue 3 took a different art approach due to the budget, most likely. But could you lean into a stylized art style that isn't sort of the standard ultra-modern, ultra-realistic stuff that modern games do, and make it stand out that way? So it still looks really, really good, still has brilliant systems, still it runs at 60 frames per second and all that sort of stuff, but looks different and people are drawn to it for that potentially. Then you draw them in with the story, the fighting engine, etc. On top of that, I've already sort of talked about this, Shenmue had a lot of challenges through development. There's going to be challenges through any game development, especially a large scale project like Shenmue and a full scale remasters, remakes. There's going to be challenges around that, and that could eat into budget, could eat into time, and then it could compromise the quality potentially. But what we'd want from it is that Shenmue, if it ever happened as a remake, would need to be of a really good standard, because the first two games were groundbreaking. A remake remaster doesn't need to be groundbreaking, not for me at least. But what it does need to do is maintain the Shenmue feel and quality that we expect. And that leads then into my sort of final thoughts, and I appreciate people sticking with me. This near on 20-minute video of just me talking. But can a remake happen? Yeah, of course it can. Absolutely. There's a market out there for remakes and nostalgia. It's tricky in this market. When you think of the most recent Final Fantasy VII remake, the second part of that, I don't believe it's sold as well as maybe people had anticipated. I think it's gone to a certain market. People of our age that have picked it up. New people don't seem to be as fussed by it. And I don't know why. You'd have to dive into the marketing and the figures and all the things around it. But that's what I've seen on a surface level on social media. So you've got that element of it, which is a risk. But on the flip side of it, if you can modernize things, you can present it in a certain way, if you can maintain that Shenmue feel, Shenmue quality, the music, the fighting system, and bring it all together in one neat, superb package, I do think this can work. It is risky though, and as I keep saying all the way through, if you do anything but Shenmue 4, it has a massive, massive risk of just binning off the whole thing completely. Now, this video is very much hypothetical. It's just something I've come up with in my head and wanted to record, but you see the point. The point being that if you don't push the story forward, and you also run the risk in terms of media of everybody going, oh, you're starting Shenmue again with the anime, the joke. You then run the risk of never finishing this thing at all. Now, you can argue that with a Shenmue 4, that if it doesn't finish, it doesn't sell well, then you're in the same position as you were from Shenmue 2 to Shenmue 3, Shenmue 3 to Shenmue 4, etc. But if you don't do well with a proper reboot, be it Shenmue 0, Shenmue 1 and 2 remake, you are utterly screwed. Then that is it. You've killed the franchise. And that is the risk you've got to balance out. Anyway, guys, that's hit the 20-odd minute mark now, so thank you for sticking with me. But what do you think? Can a remake happen? What would you like to see in it? What would you like to be changed in it? What are the pros and cons for you if this thing actually happened? And would you pick it up? I know I would, without a shadow of a doubt. And do you think it could be successful? Thank you, guys. That's the end of the video. As always, don't forget to give us a like, share, subscribe on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all the usual places. And I'll be back with a new video in the not too distant future. But for now, guys, take care. Have a good one.